Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I'm not at my desk in my den. I'm actually in my living room, sitting on my lazy boy chair, and I thought I would do something different today for a video instead of all the the mixed hauls or the thrift store visits or my CD or movie collection, those kind of things. Thought I'd do something different today. I got an email from one of the boutique cinema labels. No, it was from the Canadian distributor of, I can't remember the name of them. What is the name of them? Um, I should know it before I started this video. Anyways, they're the Canadian distributor of the Criterion Collection. So if you live in Canada and you try to buy something off of the Criterion website, they suggest you go to this website, which is a Canadian distributor of them, because then you won't have to deal with, the longer shipping times and if there's any you know, uh, customs or whatever. It doesn't have to go through customs and all that, right? So if there's any charges or whatever, right? So I can't remember that. Anyways, they sent me an email and they talked about Variety magazine. It's online now. It's variety.com. All right, and they came out with their list of the 100 greatest films of all time, and I thought it'd be fun just to go through it with you and me. Um, so I thought I'd go through uh, the 100 films and see what they chose. And I'm assuming I haven't seen all 100 of them. I'm making a guess. I've seen a lot of films, but I haven't seen a lot of older films. I haven't seen a lot of foreign films, and a lot of these lists include films from, let's say, the 1930s or 40s or 50s or whatever, before my time. Now I have seen films during those periods of time, just not a lot of them. And I have seen foreign films. I just haven't seen a lot of the films. So I'm assuming there's going to be some foreign films, non like North American films and older films that I haven't seen on this list. So we'll see. But I thought it'd be interesting to go through it, see what they think are the 100 greatest films of all time, and give my opinion on them, or solicit some of your opinions on what you think. Anyway, so it's Variety magazine, and they put out 100 film lists. So let's go through it. All right. So I have my computer. This is my computer that you can't see. It's my laptop. And we'll go through it. All right. So they started the list at 100, and then they go up to one. All right. So number 100 is The Graduate. The uh, and Bancroft, uh, Dustin Hoffman film, right? So directed by Mike Nichols, right? All right. So Mike Nichols is one of the directors that I collect, and I have The Graduate in my collection. And I have seen the film, and I've enjoyed it. It's kind of that little bit of a taboo type of subject of a younger man getting involved with an older woman. Now, this one, she's married, and he's Dustin Hoffman's a college student, and he ends up getting sexually involved with Anne Bancroft, who happens to be an older woman who's married. And so it's interesting. It's kind of uh, is during the later '60s, right, when everything started opening up, right, and like morals or whatever, or conventional, you know, um, thoughts are slowly going out the window, and you're seeing it reflected in film, right? I enjoyed the film. Is it a top 100 film? Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I wouldn't rate, like, if I was going to choose a Dustin Hoffman film to be in the top 100 list, um, it wouldn't be The Graduate. It would be either Marathon Man or Sam Peckinpah film, Straw Dogs. One of those two films would probably be in my top 100 more than The Graduate, but um, I don't have any problem with that choice. How about you? For number 100 is A Graduate. All right. So next up is 12 Angry Men at 99. Um, I have no issue with this is a top 100 film for me, but I would put it way higher than 99, in my opinion. So 12 Angry Men from 1957. Um, it stars what's his name? Henry Fonda. Is it Henry Fonda? I think it's Henry Fonda, who plays a juror, and there's 12 jurors in a room deciding over the fate of an African American man accused of murder. Okay, and it gets into all the racial prejudices and how prosecutors frame evidence in certain ways to convince you or believe that that evidence may be more than it actually is, and how defense attorneys do the exact same thing. So basically, the movie starts off with 11 of the 12 think the the man is guilty, and only one, the Henry Fonda character, um, doesn't believe he's innocent or guilty, but just thinks that there should be some talking about it. So he before they convict the man of murder, right? They should talk about it more than just vote, right? So he voted no because you need a unanimous yes or a no, right? So anyways, and it goes on from there, and he slowly convinces the other jurors to think about uh, what is motivating them to say that he's guilty and question it and so on and so forth. Anyways, it's an extremely good film, one of the great um, judicial films of all time. It's 12 Angry Men, probably the greatest. Um, and Jack Klugman is in it. Quincy, if you ever watched Quincy back in the 70s and 80s, Quincy. But anyway, so that's 12 Angry Men at 99. Number 98 is Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. All right, so this is Pedro Alm, Almodovar. Is that how you pronounce his last name? Almodovar film. And it's supposed to be pretty funny, but I have not seen it. It came out in 1988. Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. I have not seen it, so I can't really say um, whether it should be in the top 100 or not. I will have to watch it. I don't think I have. Even, do I have this? I may have this in my collection. I can't recall. Um, Number 97 is Alien. The first of the Alien franchise, the Ridley Scott film starring Sigourney Weaver. Um, yeah, it should be in a top 100. So should Aliens with the S, the James Cameron film. So we'll see if it comes up later to see if there's a James Cameron Aliens, because that was a really good film as well. But this one, where the franchise has a taste of horror in all of its films, it's more of an action-based film later on, and Cameron kind of started that with Aliens, turned the horror film into an action film. But the first film was just pure space horror, like science fiction space horror. This spider-like looking thing attaches to a guy's face, and then this embryo comes exploding out of his chest of the aliens, like the freakiest thing you ever seen back in the day, back in the 1979. Kind of blew your mind. Anyways, and it's not Ridley Scott's greatest film, but it's up there. I think his greatest film, obviously, is Blade Runner. As Blade Runner is his greatest film. Maybe Alien is his second greatest film, right? So we'll see if Blade Runner is in this list or not. If Alien's in this list and Blade Runner isn't, but they screwed up. Um, okay, so that's number 96 is A Hard Day's Night from 1964. That's the Beatles documentary, A Day in the Life of the Beatles. I have not seen it. There's just so much Beatles stuff, but it's my father's generation that went crazy over the Beatles. We got the aftermath of the Beatles. We got McCartney and Lennon and those guys as individual albums rather than the Beatles albums, right? So um, and but this basically a guy directed, and they're taking advantage of the popularity of the Beatles, right? This is in '64. This is when Beatlemania started revving up, and so they ended up deciding. Richard Lester directed it and decided to they wanted to take advantage of the popularity of the Beatles in film, right? So that's why they did this. So um, it's supposed to be a pretty good film. If I don't quote me, but I think is this the Beatles film that they have in the Criterion Collection? I think it is, isn't it? I have it, but I'm not sure if it's that one or another one. All right, so number 9. Now, I wouldn't put this in the top 100, but that's just me. Number 95 is Toy Story from 1995. Buzz Lightyear. All right. This is a great. This is what basically started Pixar. All right. Um, and the thought of it is extremely clever. Right. Let's make a movie about how toys actually are alive, but they only act alive when their owners aren't around. Right. And their main purpose in life is to bring joy to the owners of the toys, right? That's the main purpose. Anyways, it's an extremely good film. All right. Now, whether the sequels are as good, it's good that it explains where Woody comes about. He's a part of a whole bunch of action figures or whatever. Um, that's kind of cool later on, like in the second Toy Story film. But the original Toy Story film could stand on its own. It's what launched Pixar, that and Monsters, which is another clever idea. They were really good with clever ideas early on, and there's only so many clever ideas you can think of, right? So, but the idea that toys came alive when you weren't around was really interesting. And the other one is that the reason why there's monsters in your closet or under your bed is because they have a place that they live, and scaring children, the screams of children, um, is where they get their electricity or energy from to run their civilization. So it's kind of funny. And then that twist where um, laughter actually makes like 10 times the amount is a really clever twist in that film. So that film is really good too. So Pixar, in its heyday back in the 90s, were putting out some stellar, some like top ever type of animated films, right? So I mean, it's a competition between Pixar and Disney with their older stuff, and Studio Ghibli on what is the greatest animation films of all time, right? So, anyway, so that's Toy Story. I have no problem it being 95. Next up, 94 is Bridesmaids, which is that comedy with McCarthy. What's her first name? Oh, Melissa McCarthy. You know that Melissa. Anyways, it was a funny film. I don't know if I'd put it in the top 100 films of all time. I know it wasn't Judd Apatow kind of associated with this film, and Judd Apatow's films are pretty fucking hilarious. Okay, so, um, but I don't know if I'd put that one in the top 100. All right, Le Samurai is number 93. Um, Jean Pierre John Jean Pierre Melville film. All right, it's a French film. It's a tough guy, new wave. John Woo's The Killer is kind of based on it from what they're saying here. Um, I have no problem with this being in the top 100, but I have no. This is in my collection. I just haven't watched it yet, so I don't know how good it really is. All right, number 92. So that was number 93. Number 92 is Pink Flamingos. The Divine vehicle. This is famous for what she eats shit in this movie, if I remember correctly. Reading up on it, I haven't seen it really. No, I think I actually did see this film, but I saw it in my teens. When did this come out? 72. Yeah, I saw it in my teens. It was some sort of, Divine was um, had that edge thing to him or her, whatever she dressed. Basically she dresses up as a woman, right? So he dresses up as a woman. All right. Anyway, so but I don't recall this film. I wouldn't put it in the top 100 personally. All right. Scenes from a Marriage. This is supposed to be one of the great relationship films. Ingmar Bergman is one of the great directors. If you don't mind reading subtitles, this this gets it's not an action film. Let's put it that way. But it basically goes through a marriage from the beginnings of it ending to the divorce, if I remember correctly. Um, anyways, I don't know if I'd put it in the top 100, but okay. Next up is number 90, which is The Shining, um, from 1980. This is definitely a top 100 film. This is a Stanley Kubrick film, and Kubrick is up there with Scorsese and Alfred Hitchcock as the greatest filmmakers of all time, right? Um, so this film is basically based on the Stephen King book of the same name, but the film kind of concentrates more on the father, where the book concentrates more on the son, because the son has what's called this clairvoyant ability or whatever, um, which Stephen King calls the shining. It's like this special ability. But basically, this is a horror film where uh, Jack Nicholson is a writer and he accepts the job of being a caretaker of a hotel over the winter in the off season. What happens is there's a huge snowfall, and they're out in the middle of this hotel. It's deserted and they're snowed in. They can't get out, right? So basically, they're stuck in the hotel for the winter, right? And you know, supposedly the hotel's kind of haunted, and one of the spirits kind of possesses Jack Nicholson. But basically, it's like a cabin fever film where he starts getting cabin fever, and the scene, the axe scene, the "Here's Johnny" scene. That scene is one of the iconic scenes in Hollywood history, right? So it definitely should be in the top 100. Next up is number 89, Belle de Jour. All right. So Catherine Deneuve is in this, and she's really good in it. I just watched this actually uh, within the last couple of months. I watched this film, right, and it was pretty good. It's basically a middle class or upper middle class bourgeoisie kind of wife who's bored with her life, and she decides to take up afternoon prostitution kind of idea, like to spice up her life, I guess, or whatever. Anyways, it's not bad. I don't know if it's top 100, but I guess it was pretty on the edge at the time of its filming in the 60s. Right. So number 88 is a Spike Lee film, Malcolm X. Now, if they're gonna put a Spike Lee film in, and it should be Do the Right Thing. So if it's number 88, then Do the Right Thing better be up there higher if they're going to include Malcolm X. Now, Denzel Washington does a really good job in this film as Malcolm X, and the film is a good film, right? But it's not as good as Do the Right Thing. Do the Right Thing is a better film, at least in my opinion. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't put Malcolm X in the top 100, but that's just me. 87 is The Sound of Music, definitely top 100. Both of her films, The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins, would both uh, I would have no issue with either one of those two films. Julie Andrews, I'm talking about. Um, those films in the top 100. This is one of the great, musicals of all time, Sound of Music, right? She does an amazing job in this film. All right. It's really funny she does this and she does, Mary Poppins, and then she did that film where she shows off her boobs. What the hell was that film? That was like the funniest thing. Was it called Bullshit? Was it? I can't remember. But I have no problem it being at 87. Number 86 is Close Up from 1990. And this is that Iranian film. Um, what was the director's name? Uh, Abbas Kiarostami. Abbas Kiarostami. It's basically a blending of documentary slash not documentary. You know what I mean? It's kind of like blends reality with filmmaking in the two of it. And I have not seen this film. I don't have this film. I've been looking for this film for a while. But supposedly it's really good. So I don't think I'd have a problem it being in the top 100. Number 85 is Oliver Stone's Born Killers, 1994, with Juliette Lewis and Robert Downey Jr. and Woody Harrelson. Um, this is out of out of all of Oliver Stone's films, I think this is probably his best film. I'm not a huge fan of biopics, like he did JFK. Um, he did a George Bush. He did a George Bush one. Um, he's done a few, like films on. did the Doors, that kind of thing. I'm not a huge fan of dramatizing a person's life. I like creation rather than you know transferring. Right? Seems like lazy filmmaking. I may be wrong, but if the story's already there and you take it and you just make a dramatic uh, film about the story, you know there's no originality in it, right? You know what I mean? Anyways, but that's just me. So I'm not huge on biopics. I mean, there are some good biopics. Is that how you say it? Biopics or biopics? Anyway, so but this film is extremely good, and from my understanding, Quentin Tarantino kind of wrote it at the beginning, and then Oliver Stone took over the film, and then kind of rewrote a bunch of it and made the film. But you can tell that it's got that a bit of that Tarantino flair to it, right? So um, basically, it's about two Bonnie and Clyde type serial killers, and but what interested me more than that was the take that Oliver Stone did on it with the Robert Downey Jr. Um, character, where he's following them all around, making them famous, and it's like a satire on celebrity, right? Why would these people be famous and loved like they're killers, right? So anyways, Robert Downey Jr. is like a Geraldo Rivera type character and follows them around and interviewing all he's like a third wheel on their travels or whatever, and he ends up dead in the end, right, because of it. So it's a really good film. I wouldn't mind it being in the top 100. Next up is number 84, which is Geronimo del Toro. Is that how you pronounce his name? Guillermo del Toro's film Pan's Labyrinth. No issue with this being in the top 100. Is an extremely good film. Nobody does like a really freaky type of um, I don't know how to describe it, fantasy type of film, like Del Toro did with Pan's Labyrinth. It was an extremely good film, so I have no problem with it being in the top 100 at all. Number 83 is Kramer versus Kramer. I watched this when I was 10 or 11. I don't know. It was one of the first adult, not adult as in pornographic film, but adult subject matter film when I was a kid growing up. This was one of the first films I watched that way. And stars another, Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman play husband and wife, and they separate, and then there's this big huge battle over their son, where they're pulling their son apart almost like, and it's extremely heart wrenching. But I watched it again recently, and it's lost its luster. I didn't feel the way I did, and how impressed I was when I was younger watching it, because I've watched it numerous times. Not just the first time I watched it when I was, like I said, maybe 11, 12, 13, somewhere along there. Um, but then I did watch it again in my 20s, and I always was quite impressed with the film. But I watched it recently, and it doesn't hold its luster anymore. So I don't know if I'd put it in the top 100 of my list. Right after that is number 82 is Parasite. So this is a South Korean Bong Joon-ho film, right? Um, and it's supposed to be extremely good. I have it on Blu-ray in my collection, but I haven't watched it yet. Um, so I can't really judge it. But if from what everybody is saying about this film um, holds up, then yeah, it's a top 100 film, right? So number 81 is The Dark Knight. Can't go wrong with Christopher Nolan's Batman films. They're all good, but the second one is the best one, and the reason why isn't necessarily because of Batman. It was because of Joker and Heath Ledger's version of the Joker. He just blew away the screen with how he portrayed the Joker, and it made the film. It made Batman when Batman Begins came out, and everybody watched Batman Begins. They were comparing it to the Tim Burton Batmans, right? So, and it held up really well. In fact, it held up really well. But it's the Batman story, right? Everybody has seen that story, but it's the second one, The Dark Knight, where the Joker comes along, and nobody's seen the Joker like the way Heath Ledger played the Joker before, right? I mean, Jack Nicholson did a good job, but he was more of a cartoon character than he was with Heath Ledger. He was cartoonish, but he was sinister, and you could uh, that that sinisterness, if that's a word, was palatable. You could feel it, and you could imagine it being true, right? So, whereas in the Jack Nicholson character, um, seemed a bit too cartoonish, right? And a lot of the characters in Tim Burton films were cartoonish in a lot of ways, right? So, but when those Batman films came out, like especially that first Batman, it was like nuts in the theaters and everywhere else. It was just a huge phenomenon, that Batman film, when it first came out, because we never had a Batman film, right? The only Batman we had was, the Batmans from our parents' generation on TV, right? So when that Batman film came out in, what was it, the early '80s, right? Yeah, the marketing on that. I mean, every second person walking down the street was wearing a Batman T-shirt with that Batman logo on it, and everything was just crazy. Um, and anyways, but I'm digressing. So, The Dark Knight in the top 100, sure. Um, Pixote is number 80 from 1980. This is a Brazilian film, directed by Hector Babenco. Um, it's his film, and it's basically, I don't know what this film is about. This is the first time I've heard it. Right? Directed this shocking indictment of how terribly authorities had been treating street kids in Sao Paulo, testing the limits of what the state censorship permitted at the time, with this film's non-professional cast. And it was on it. So it's a Brazilian film, but I've never watched it or heard of it. So number 79 is Waiting for Guffman, and Christopher Guest has a flair with these pseudo documentaries where, um, but I don't think Waiting for Guffman is his best. I think Best in Show is, right. At least in my opinion, the Best in Show. Maybe Waiting for Guffman was fun. It was about this, you know, there was like an anniversary for the city coming up, and the in this city, and they decide they're going to do some sort of documentary for it, and it ends up going really weirdly. But Best in Show is hilarious because I find it funnier because they're kind of parodying that whole culture around dog shows, and it's quite funny, although dry, but it's really funny. But Christopher Guest, I think, did two or three of this type of mockumentary or whatever. So yeah, but I don't know if I put Best in Show or Waiting for Guffman in a top 100 list. Probably not. Next up, number 78 is Jean Dielman 23 Quoi de Commerce uh, 1080 Bruxelles from 1975. I don't know what all that meant, but um, this film I have not watched, so I don't know anything about it. I don't know if it deserves to be in the top 100. You tell me if you've seen it. All right. 77 is Goldfinger, so you got your first James Bond film. If this is the only James Bond in it, is Goldfinger the best James Bond film out of all the James Bond films? Um, I don't know. My favorite James Bond film is, other than the Daniel Craig films where they got serious with James Bond, there's less like playboyish type of thing and more serious violence. Um, in the Daniel Craig version of James Bond, where there isn't as much humor like with Roger Moore or Sean Connery, right? You get that playboy feeling, like that playboy look to it, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so, but my favorite film is Moonraker. I always liked Moonraker because they mix spy in with in with science fiction, and Jaws fell in love in that film, so that was kind of sweet. And anyway, so for some reason I like Moonraker out of all the films. So, but Goldfinger in the top 100 or a James Bond film in the top 100, I don't know. It's kind of formulaic, isn't it? I don't know how. I don't know. Next up is number 76, which is a Terrence Malick film, The Tree of Life. I tried to watch this film and I had to stop it after the first 30 minutes. I can't remember why, but it kind of, I don't know, it bored me a bit. But Malick is a director that I collect, and I do have this film in my collection. I don't know if I'd put it in the top 100, though. Number 75 is Boogie Nights, and this is a Paul Thomas Anderson film starring Mark Wahlberg. Um, and it's kind of loosely based on, isn't it loosely based on John Holmes, the big porn star in the 70s, um, who ended up dying of AIDS. Uh, and I think the Mark Wahlberg character is kind of based on him, right? Dark Diggler. Anyways, it's a funny and a sad and just a great overall film. Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favorite directors. He did this one. He did, what else did he do? He did Punch Drunk Love, if I remember correctly, the Adam Sandler film where he doesn't play a comedian in it. That was a really good film as well. But most of Paul Thomas Anderson's stuff um, is undisappointing. I mean, he's a really good director. And Boogie Nights is really good. I laughed really hard in the Burt Reynolds scene where he's like all in Vaseline, and then he puts on his cowboy boots, and he and his cowboy boots are all squeaky or whatever. That was funny. But basically, the film is about the transitioning period, the ending of pornography in theaters. All right, it used to be that if you wanted to go see a porn, you would go to the theaters. Now it's online. You can just access it from any computer or whatever. But me growing up, porn was in the it left the movie theaters, um, and it went to home video basically because everybody was buying. It was the invention of Betamax and VHS, and you get a VHS player at home, and then you go to the movie store, and there would be a big, huge section of movies that you can get, and in the back of the movie store, around a curtain was the X-rated, the porn films in behind the curtain, so the kids couldn't see them. You could go in there and rent whatever film you want, right? So, what would be, like Deep Throat? That was a pretty good porn film. Um, Behind the Green Door. Have you ever seen that one? It was like an artistic porn film, right? You got like slow motion shots of ejaculant going through the air, and it's beautiful with lights and everything. It's really interesting porn film. I think it was Behind the Green Door, Behind the Blue Door. I can't remember what it was called. Um, and then there's Pink Lagoon. That was based on like Blue Lagoon. That was kind of you know you saw stories start getting put um, in the back, and it was all about like one scene after another of stupidities, right? So um, and you also saw the removal of hair. All right, basically the 70s porn was everybody was natural hair everywhere, and then you got into the 80s and all that hair disappeared and everybody was basically hairless, right? So um, this makes me sound like I'm some sort of pervert or whatever that goes to movie theaters. And I haven't been in a movie theater. It's just that's what the film is about, right? So there's a transition period between film and theaters, like adult films and theaters, to it going onto VHS and going into people's houses, and that industry totally disappearing. Well, film owners or film people disappearing, and it all changed, right? So, Paul Thomas Anderson kind of documents that in Boogie Nights, right? So, um, who really impressed me in this film actually wasn't Mark Wahlberg, was what's his name? I can't remember his name. I'll put his name down here. He's the guy that was in the film with he's in a bunch of films. I'll put his name down here. He was really good in this film um, as like Dirk Diggler's friend. Anyways, you have to watch the film in order to understand what I'm talking about. All right, so number 74 is My Neighbor Totoro from 1988. This is I have problem with his name. Hayao Miyazaki, with Studio Ghibli or Ghibli. They have like 22, I think it's 22 films altogether, Studio Ghibli. Um, but I'm not sure why My Neighbor Totoro would be the one that they choose. The greatest Studio Ghibli film, in my opinion, is Grave of the Fireflies, and that's one of the most depressing films I've ever seen in my life. And it's a friggin' cartoon, and it still grabs a hold of you. And after you finish watching that film, you're like sad for hours afterwards, right? So, um, My Neighbor Totoro is a really good film as well. It's kind of like a magical type of film with kids, and there's this like imaginary creature. Um, it's got all that mystic type of stuff to it. Um, it's quite fun to watch, and it's like a magical film, but Grave of the Fireflies, my God, that's probably the greatest anime film of all time. Although most people say it's Akira, don't they? Don't they say Akira? I wonder if Akira will be here. If they have Studio Ghibli, I wonder if they put regular anime films in here or not. Anyways, if Akira isn't here, then I'm not sure why My Neighbor Totoro is. But anyways, so My Neighbor Totoro. So I guess that's the Ghibli film. Let's see if Grave of the Fireflies comes up later on or not. If not, they picked the wrong film, I think. Um, Next up, number 73 is Intolerance from 1916. So this is a black and white silent film from who? D.W. Griffith. All right, so D.W. Griffith film. And what is this film about? Because I don't know anything about this film. Um, Anyways, have you seen Intolerance? Number 73. Okay. So number 72 is Breaking the Waves. This is a Lars von Trier film. Lars von Trier? Trier, yeah, but he's made some quite impressive films. Like Dogma is really good, but my favorite film of his isn't Dogma, although Dogma is right up there. Breaking the Waves is good, but Dogma I think is better than that. But even better than that, I think is the Bjork film. What was that Bjork film? That was an extremely good film. Depressing as hell, made you really cry. How was the name of that film? The soundtrack of it was called Selma Songs. Why can't I remember the name of the film? Dancer in the Dark. All right. I think Lars von Trier's best film is Dancer in the Dark. Now, what Lars von Trier is known for is a feeling that his films are like documentaries more than fiction, right? Because it's like he walks around with a handheld camera and films the film with a handheld camera. A lot of his films are that way. Dancer in the Dark is definitely that way, and it does make it documentary-ish. But it's basically one of the weirdest musicals I've ever seen, where like Bjork sings in it, but there's not a whole. I mean, there are a bit of dance and that in it, but it's not like it. It seems like a very minor part of the film, like some sequences or whatever in it. It seems like where she kind of flutters off into a fantasy world or whatever, right? And then she sings in it. But it's not the main part of the film. The main part of the film is the plot line that goes. Anyways, it's a pretty tragic film if you haven't seen it. Dancer in the Dark, extremely good. I think it's better than Breaking the Waves, but they have Breaking the Waves in here. And the Lars von Trier film, The Top 100. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. All right. So next up is number 71, My Best Friend's Wedding. I would not put this in the top 100. Julie Roberts, Julie Roberts vehicle. I think. Well, my favorite. A lot of people will cite what the Richard Gere film was, a Pretty Woman, where she plays a prostitute, as Julie Roberts' best film. But personally, I think her best film is the one with Denzel Washington, where called The Pelican Brief. I think that one is probably her best film. But even The Pelican Brief, I wouldn't put in the top 100. Not sure why My Best Friend's Wedding is in there. All right, next up is number 70. It's 12 Years a Slave from 2013. I have this film. I've watched it. It's interesting. It's not top 100 film. Sorry, I don't think it would be in the top 100. Um, but it's there. Um, Number 69 is Beau Travail from 1999. I have not seen this film, so I can't really judge on whether it belongs in the top 100 or not. I'll have to watch it. Number 68 is King Kong from 1933, so the original. Um, Out of all the King Kongs and all the super large monster movies, is 1933 King Kong the best? I don't know. But number 68, I don't have a problem with King Kong in the top 100. I don't know. It's not a really super entertaining film. But number 67 is Bicycle Thieves. All right. And this is, um, I've not seen this film. It's part of the Criterion Collection. Right now, I'm watching all my films starting from A going down to Z in the main section of my library, not in the director section. Then I'll go through all the director films. But that's what I'm doing right now, and this is on my list of watching, but I haven't seen it yet. All right, next up is number 66, Paris is Burning, from 1990. I have not seen this film, so I'm not going to comment on it. If you've seen it, let me know what you think. All right. Um, Number 65 is A Man Escaped from 1956. Um, did Luc Besson? No, not Luc Besson. Robert Bresson directed this film. I have not seen it. Okay, number 64 is Carrie. As you can see, I'm more North American centric with the films that I've seen. I have seen some foreign films, but a lot of the greatest foreign films ever made, I have not seen. So um, I can't tell whether they should be in the top 100 or not. Um, anyway, so number 64 is another Stephen King book turned into a film. This one stars Sissy Spacek. It's called Carrie from 1976. And this is up there, uh, some of the greatest horror films of all time. This is one of them. Personally, I think The Exorcist, the Friedkin film, is the greatest horror film of all time. But um, Carrie is up there. This is Brian De Palma, one of my favorite directors. My favorite film by him. I wonder if they're going to put it. Probably not. If they have Carrie in here, probably not. Um, I really enjoyed his dedication film to Alfred Hitchcock, which was called Body Double. Man, that was such an enjoyable film to watch. Better than Scarface. I wonder if Carrie's here. Will Scarface be here? We'll see. Um, anyway, so most people cite Scarface as his greatest film, but I think my all-time favorite Brian De Palma film is um, uh, Body Double. It has Melanie Griffith in it, and one of her first, it might have been her first role actually. But it's quite funny, but it's all about a murder and mistaken identity and everything, like Hitchcock films are like that. So, all right, so that's Carrie from 1964. Had a young John Travolta in it, and it's basically this girl who has a really crazy mother who's like super religious or whatever, and looks on her daughter as an evil spawn because she has telekinetic abilities, whatever that ability is that you can move objects with your mind as a telekinesis, and she ends up losing it at the end. Um, all right, so 63 is Bambi. Have no problem with Bambi in the top 100. Got to have at least one Disney film in the top 100. Why not Bambi? Bambi is very sad. Did anybody not cry when you saw Bambi's mother die and he was left an orphan as a child? Yeah, it's definite tear jerker, right? Number 62 is a Richard Linklater film. It looks like Dazed and Confused. I just watched this again just a couple of weeks ago. I don't think Linklater could make this film today, could he? Um, with what culture we're in now, um, there's a lot of drug use in this film, and it's all about high school and coming of age and all that. But there's a section where the seniors go over to the junior high, and the seniors have these paddles, right? And they're going to beat the living crap out of the juniors' butts. Let's put it that way. It's like an initiation thing, um, and there's no way that would be you know that would be deemed bullying, and I mean, they took that out of college life as well and everything. There was like a big backlash when it came to that kind of thing because, some people committed suicide and other things, right? So I don't think this film would be made today. But it was made in '93, which is what, 20 something years ago. So society has definitely changed a lot. This is basically the '90s uh, representation of the high school film, like Fast Times at Ridgemont High for the '90s, right? The '80s it was Fast Time at Ridgemont High. The '90s was Dazed and Confused. Richard Linklater has a lot of pretty good films. I really like A Scanner Darkly by him. That film was pretty cool to watch with Keanu Reeves. Anyways, all right. So I have no problem with that being in the top 100. Number 61 is The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928. It's another silent film. Theodore Dreyer directed it. Carl Theodore Dreyer directed it. He's a big name in early cinema. So we got to have one of, some early cinema in here, right? So I have no problem with that. Passion of Joan of Arc. I haven't seen it though. Number 60 is Moulin Rouge, which was a musical. I have no problem with the film. I thought it was pretty good, but I wouldn't put it in my top 100. Nicole Kidman vehicle. Um, when I watched it, yeah, it's a very entertaining film. So, what did you think of it? All right. So number 59 is Vagabond from 1985. All right, Angus Varda. Um, and I have not seen this film. Another foreign film that I haven't seen. All right, number 58 is E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I have no problem with Spielberg being in the top 100. Um, what is Spielberg's greatest film? Is it E.T.? Is it Jaws? Is it Close Encounters? Is it Saving Private Ryan? Like what? He's got so many great films, right? So, and I'm probably even missing some. I'm not even thinking of some of them, right? I have no problem with E.T. being in the top 100 as one. It's one of the great science fiction films of all time. Um, Next up is number 57, Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain. Not sure why this is here. I wouldn't pick it. I would put Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon as his best film. Why Brokeback Mountain? I tried to watch this film. It is in my collection, but I just can't see Heath Ledger as a gay cowboy um, after seeing him as the Joker, right? Because I didn't watch this film until after I watched, I didn't see this film until after I watched, like The Dark Knight or whatever. I didn't think this movie was all that impressive. I enjoyed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon a lot more. Um, but Ang Lee is a director that I collect, and I do have Brokeback Mountain. Um, do I have Brokeback Mountain in my library? I don't know. I may have. I'm not sure. So next up is Rosemary's Baby, the Roman Polanski film, and I watched this when I was young, and I thought it was a stupid film. All right, I'm going, you know, like nothing scary happens in it, right? It's all psychological, and when you're young, you don't get the psychological thing to it, right? Another movie that was similar to that was The Birds for me, the Alfred Hitchcock film The Birds. I'm going, what a stupid fucking film. Just a bunch of birds attacking people. That's not scary at all. Where's the knife wielding monsters and shit like that, right? Uh, Same with Rosemary's Baby, right? So, but then I watched it when I was more mature and older, and the birds freaked the living crap out of me. All right, because when you think of it, when you ponder that if birds decided they don't like humans, you know what type of chaos is going to happen because there's like millions of birds and they're all above you flying down on you. You know what I mean? It's like there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, um, yeah, that's really freaky. Same thing with Rosemary's Baby, with the baby being like the spawn of the devil. It's like the psychological thing on that is like really freaky, right? So it is a very good film. Um, I have no issue with it being 56 um, in the top 100, right? But he's made a lot of good films, even though he's a bit of a scumbag, isn't he? Didn't he date like an underage kid or something? Date? Can you say date? That doesn't make sense. Wasn't he like some sort of pedophile or whatever? I'm not sure. Um, all right, next up, number 55 is Panther Pen Charlie from 1955. See, there's a lot of that going on where number 76 will be a film from 1976. that kind of thing. So this isn't this the one of the films of the Abu trilogy that you get in the Criterion Collection? There's three films starring this boy. Um, yeah, the Apu trilogy, right? So I have not watched this. It's an Indian trilogy of films, and I do have it in my collection with the Criterion Collection, but I haven't watched it yet. So have you watched it? What do you think of it? Number 55. What do you think? Number 54 is The Road Warrior, the the George Miller directed film. I think this is the second one. The first one being Mad Max, obviously. And The Road Warrior is just more of an expansion of what happened in Mad Max. And both films are really good, although you can tell they're kind of B movish, right? Low budget type of movies, but they gave Mel Gibson his start to become a Hollywood superstar, um, and they are good. And George Miller directed what all four of them, right? He directed Mad Max. He directed um, The Road Warrior, which is here. Would you choose The Road Warrior over Mad Max? I'm not sure. Anyway, so and he did a Beyond Thunderdome. He directed that one. That one wasn't all that great. It seemed too Hollywoodish. When you watch the first two films, they have that um, foreignness to them, right? That's kind of endearing. They're violent films or whatever, but they're just a little bit different than your Hollywood blockbuster or whatever. But then the third film seemed like it came out of Hollywood rather than out of an independent film. Like it had a budget, and because of it had a budget, it looked a lot better, but it made it seem less realistic, right? So, um, but then you go to Fury Road, um, and Miller, and that film is an extremely good film. All right, um, so the Mad Max uh, franchise is a good franchise to watch if you haven't watched it, and I have no problem with the Road Warrior being in the top 100. Number 53 is In the Mood for Love from 2000. This is a Hong Kong film. Yeah, one of the most beautiful movies ever made. Hong Kong master Wong Kar-wai's rapturously repressed romance unfolds, and so on and so forth. So I have not seen this film. I don't even think I have this in my collection. So maybe I'll have to search it out. Because I haven't seen it, I wouldn't have put it in my top 100. All right. So the next up is The General, which is basically a Buster Keaton film, isn't it? Isn't it a Buster Keaton uh, film from 1926? I think so. Um, upon its release, critics considered this tight Civil War epic to be Buster Keaton's least funny film. All right. So um, nothing wrong with having a Buster Keaton and a Charlie Chaplin, those guys back in the 30s and 20s, film in your top 100, right? Number 51 is Apocalypse Now. Probably, in my opinion, the second greatest war film of all time behind Full Metal Jacket, the Kubrick film. So this Coppola film. So Francis Ford Coppola made this one. He made the Godfathers, and those ones, he has like three out of the probably top 20 films of all time. He has three of them. Now this one is put in on 50. It could have been put higher. This one's at 51. Basically, it's about the Vietnam War and Colonel Kurtz and how they're going upstream to go shoot the fucker, right? It's quite a good film. It basically shows how war or these circumstances can turn to madness, right? So, um, number 50 is Breathless from 1960. Um, this is like part of the French New Wave, isn't it? Um, and I'm not sure, but didn't Richard Gere do a remake of this Americanized version of Breathless? I'm not sure. I know he was in a film called Breathless, and I'd seen that film. I thought it was quite good, but maybe it was just taken from this original. Jean-Paul Belmondo glances at a vintage movie still, traces his lips with his thumb, and utters the enchanted word "bogey." In that simple moment, a cinematic ocean gets crossed. Anyway, so um, I have no problem with Breathless being in. It's considered one of the greats, right? So number 49 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Um, Toby Hooper. This is a Toby Hooper directed film. Um, this is the first horror film that ever turned my stomach. Um, and I don't like having my stomach turned in film. This happened when I watched this film in the 80s. It turned my stomach because there's some scenes in it where it's really dark. At least it was when I was watching the VHS tape. Maybe they cleaned it up, but you couldn't see hardly anything. It was pitch dark out. All you could hear was um, people screaming and a girl screaming and the chainsaw, the vroom vroom of the chainsaw and the girl screaming and the guy in a wheelchair going right. And because you couldn't see it too well, you had it engaged your imagination of what seemed to be happening. And when I started thinking of that kind of thing, and then another section of the film where it shows inside the cabin of Leatherface, and you see his bed, and it's made out of human um, bones and stuff, right? It was like, okay, but that those scenes that were dark and you couldn't see what was happening, uh, they kind of turned my stomach at the time. And it wasn't until the early 2000s when Hostel came out, and Hostel was the next film out of all the horror films that I watched between the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the early 2000s with Hostel did a horror film turn my stomach, right? So um, I don't once all the the Saw films and the other films that came out in the early 2000s, when it took horror in that kind of direction, it kind of killed me on horror, and I stopped watching horror after that. All right, so number 48 is The Piano. All right, what is this? Is this a New Zealand? Da, 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 da. I'm reading Harvey Keitel. I have not seen this film. Sorry for my yawn. It's getting a bit late. So I'm not sure if The Piano. Hold on, is this the Adrian Brody film, The Piano, about World War II? Sam Neill, Harvey Keitel, Jane Campion. No, it's not. Okay, so next up is 47 Mean Streets, 1973. I'm not sure why they would put this Scorsese film. He has so many better films than this one. But maybe those better films will be up higher in the list. So I would put Mean Streets in my top 100 list. Um, the 46 is Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. All right, he's had so many great films. You could basically take Kubrick and Hitchcock and fill out like 20 slots in the top 100 if you want, and nobody would bat an eye on it, right? So anyway, so Notorious. Um, I don't remember if I saw this film or not. So number 45 is Titanic. So um, they have Titanic as James Cameron's film instead of Aliens 2. Interesting choice, I guess. Titanic is a very. I enjoyed the film actually. Um, the first half was basically a romance. It seemed, and the second half was a disaster film. So it's like two films in one. You got a romantic film, a romance, and then you got a disaster film all in one film, right? So um, it wasn't a bad film, but I would put Aliens too. Maybe they didn't put aliens in it, Aliens or Alien 2 or whatever in it because they had Alien, right? They didn't want to copy it again. So I guess they used this one, but I don't know. How about the Terminator? The Terminator was a great film, um, better than Titanic in my opinion, but that's just me. All right, so number 44 is La Ventura from 1960. All right, um, this is part of the Criterion Collection as well, and I have not seen this film, so it's another foreign film again. Antonini's film, right? It's his first masterpiece, is what I'm reading it right. So, uh, Yeah, Michelangelo and Antonioni. So it's an Italian film, but I have not seen it. Um, Number 43 is Showa from 1985, and directed by Claude Lanzmann. So I have not seen this film. So we'll move on to the next one. Moonlight from 2016. This is supposed to be an extremely good film. I have it in my collection downstairs, but again, I haven't watched it. I have so many films in my collection that I haven't watched, but I don't know if I'd put that. I'll have to see it, see if it blows me away. Whether I put it in the top 100 or not, I'm not sure. 41 is The Wild Bunch. Is this the Sam Peckinpah film? I think this is Sam Peckinpah. Yeah, it is. Um, from 1969, I have no issue. Sam Peckinpah films are very good. They got that added bit of violence in them that a lot of times you don't see. It, he's kind of like he had that attitude. Uh, let's make this a little bit more violent than my contemporaries. It's kind of like what's his name, with Starship Troopers and RoboCop. Uh, anyway, yeah, so this was a great western, and I have no issue with it being in the top 100. Number 40 is Fargo, which is probably the Coen brothers' second best film. I think the Big Lebowski is probably their best film. They've made so many good films though, and Fargo and um, the Big Lebowski are the Coen brothers' two best. So, and what's her name who plays the Frances McDormand plays Marge, the police chief. She did an extremely good job in that film. Extremely good job. Uh, so yeah, I have no problem with you could put a few of the Coen Brothers films in the top 100. I would have no issue with it. Um, Number 39 is Some Like It Hot. All right, is this a Billy Wilder film? I think this is Billy Wilder. Is this Billy Wilder? Um, it doesn't look like it says. It's basically talking about Marilyn Monroe. So any film with Marilyn Monroe is watchworthy. Some Like It Hot. Um, I have no issue with it being in the top 100. Number 38 is Lawrence of Arabia. I just watched this film recently as well. Um, Peter O'Toole does a bang up job in this. He's psychologically damaged in this film, it seems. And but overall, I mean, the cinematography in this film is it's worth it even without the story. The shots of the desert and the sky and all that. It's extremely gorgeous film. All right, and um, I have no issue with it being in the top 100. Number 37 is Annie Hall, from 1977. Got to have a Woody Harrelson. Got to have a Woody Allen film in your top 100, don't you? Um, and Annie Hall is extremely good. It's one of his best films. My all-time favorite film of his though is Sleeper. So I would like to see Sleeper. Like if I was to choose a film by him, I'd probably put Sleeper in my top 100 rather than Annie Hall. If I was only going to choose one Woody Allen film, right? Number 36 is On the Waterfront from 1954. This one is a Kazan film, isn't it? Elia, how do you pronounce his name? Elia Kazan. I think this is Elia Kazan and plays an early Marlon Brando. Um, and I have no issue with that being in the top 100. Number 35 is Silence of the Lambs. If you don't consider this a thriller and more of a horror, then this could be the greatest horror film of all time because it is one of the greatest thrillers of all time. Suspense. I mean, Anthony Hopkins does an extremely good job, and so does Jodie Foster, right? And yeah, extremely good. That scene where she goes after Buffalo Bill, and Buffalo Bill kills the power in his house and gets right close to her. Um, that is a really freaky scene, but it's full of freaky scenes. This film, it's such a good film. Like that part where Buffalo Bill, um, hides his genitals and just shows his pubic hair, and he backs up to the camera to make himself look like he's a female. That was a bit of a freaky uh, part of the film as well. There was another part where Clarice was walking away from Hannibal Lecter and and the crazy person in the next cell ended up ejaculating and throwing semen at her, right? So that was pretty gross. So there's a whole bunch of, there's, after this film came out, you heard a lot of people, saying when they wanted somebody to do something, they would say, the person will put the lotion on the, you know. So if you wanted your husband to do something, you say the husband will put the groceries on the table or whatever. A lot of people, at least in my circle of friends, uh, that section with Buffalo Bill where he goes, uh, we'll put the lotion or we'll get the hose or whatever, that kind of thing, right? So they made fun of it, but extremely good film. I have no problem with this. Who directed this film? Was it Jonathan Demme? Yeah, Jonathan Demme. All right, so number 34 is Stagecoach, which is what, an early John Ford film? It's a John Ford film, right? Um, it took John Ford, one of the greatest American filmmakers, to elevate the image of the Western and earn the genre the respect it deserved. All right. I think this is a John Wayne vehicle, isn't it? Wasn't John Wayne in this? Yeah, John Wayne, starring an iconic John Wayne. All right, so John Ford and John Wayne, no problem in the top 100. Then Fellini, I think this is a Fellini film. La Dolce Vita, La Strada. Yeah, Fellini. Okay, so 8.5 by Fellini, another Criterion Collection film that I haven't watched yet. No problem with Fellini being in the top 100, right? Number 32 is another Hitchcock film, Vertigo. Can't go wrong with Vertigo. Extremely good film. Everybody knows it. I don't really talk about it much. Then number 31 is Network from 1976. This is supposed to be like I watched this. Did I watch this? Anyways, it's supposed to be extremely good film. So we'll see when I watch it again. I think I watched it when I was a kid. So number 30 is The Empire Strikes Back. So I guess this one is maybe, see if they have it. My favorite Star Wars film is Return of the Jedi. Some people think the Ewoks are like, makes Star Wars look foolish or whatever, right? But I found them quite endearing, right? And there's a part where one of the Ewoks gets blown up or whatever, and his friend Ewok is shaking him to wake him up, and he doesn't wake up. That was like a pretty sad section of that, but I liked I liked it because my favorite out of all the scenes that you see in Star Wars, my favorite action scene in all the Star Wars films was when they were on those, hovering motorcycle things going through all the trees, right? I always found that really enjoyable, right? Um, so I like Return of the Jedi more. I wonder if they'll have the first Star Wars above this. And this is number 30, The Empire Strikes Back. So if Star Wars is up higher, it's getting up to the top 10, right? So all right, so next up after that is Double Indemnity, right? This is a Billy Wilder film, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Billy Wilder, film noir, one of the great film noirs. I just actually watched this because I watched this and then I read the book as well to do a book to uh, movie comparison, and basically the book is as good as the movie, and the movie is as good as the book. I have no problem with this being in the top 100. Number 28, there we finally have a Charlie Chaplin vehicle, City Lights, all right, from 1931. No issue with that. Number 27 is Bonnie and Clyde from 1976. This is, who is this? Is this Faye Dunaway? It's Faye Dunaway and yeah, Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty. All right, so yeah, I think this is kind of high actually. If it hit my top 100, it'd probably be in the 90s or whatever, right? Number 26 is the 400 Blows, another foreign film, part of the Criterion Collection as well. Who directed this? Jean-Pierre Léaud? No, he starred in it. Truffaut, yeah, Francois Truffaut film. I have not seen this. Another foreign film, right? There's so many European films that I have not seen that I should be watching, right? So, and they're all in the Criterion Collection. I have them in my collection. So, all right, number 25 is Bringing Up Baby. This is one of the great romantic comedies of all time from 1938. My favorite one, obviously, you don't know, it's not obvious. So, um, my favorite romantic comedy is When Harry Met Sally. I also like um, Love Actually is really good as well. And Like for teenagers, I like Some Kind of Wonderful, but these are all 80s or 90s films, right? This one's from 1938, but I have seen this film and I really enjoyed it. I just don't remember it as much as I should from getting older. I watched it a few years back. All right, so but I have no problem with that being in the top 100. Number 24 is Tokyo Story from 1953. This is an Ozu film, I think. Is it? The last film in Ozu's Noriko trilogy after late spring and early summer. Tokyo Story. All right, so Ozu is up there with Kurosawa and other directors in Japan. He's one of the great Japanese directors, so I have no problem with that being in the top 100. Number 23 is The Apartment from 1960. This is an extremely good film. Shirley MacLaine is electric in this film. Jack Lemmon is really good in this film. It's basically, I watched this, last time I watched this was it in the 90s? I think it was in the late 90s I watched this film. Um, I got it from the library, actually. I was watching a bunch of films. They had a Criterion collection in the library that I started watching some of those films, and then non-Criterion films, and this was one of them. And I watched that, and I went, okay. I saw Shirley MacLaine as an older woman, right? I didn't see her earlier films, like in Steel Magnolias and that kind of thing, where she plays, the mother of an adult, like a grandparent type of idea. She did really well with those roles, but I never saw her in early films until I saw this film, and yeah, she was quite good. So I have no problem with The Apartment being number 23. Number 22 is Chinatown. This is another Roman Polanski film. Um, I have no issue. Uh, Jack Nicholson does a great job in this film. It's kind of like a neo noir, is it considered a neo noir? Yeah, I think so. This is the LA neo noir to end all LA neo noirs. All right, so I have no problem with that being that high. Gone with the Wind and number 21 from 1939. I watched this film. I didn't think it was super great or anything, but it was epic like, right? And it's an early film and it was in color, so that's one thing that caught my attention as well. And the story isn't bad, but I would never put Gone with the Wind in my top 100. Um, Number 20 is Blue Velvet. This is a Lynch? Isn't this a Lynch film? I think so. I have not seen this. Is it a David Lynch film? Yeah, David Lynch. All right, so this is a David Lynch film from 1986, and Lynch's films are kind of hard to get. The Elephant Man was okay, but it was a bit, uh, and then he's a bit out there. Eraserhead was a bit out there as well. Um, so my favorite film by him is Mulholland Drive. It's got that Lynch feel to it, but it isn't as extreme as the other films, right? So, um, um, yeah. So Blue Velvet is considered one of the great. I don't know if I was going to put a Lynch film in the top 100, I would put Mulholland Drive in it. That is an extremely good film, and it kind of lessens the Lynchness of the film, if you know what I mean, where you kind of get lost in it. Lost Highway is another one by him that was pretty good as well, right? So I don't know why Blue Velvet is there, but okay. All right. So number 19 is The Godfather Part 2 from 1974. Isn't this one of the only sequels to ever win an Academy Award? It's my favorite of the three Godfathers. I like the first Godfather, but I like the second one more because it tells the story of, you know, uh, Corleone, and you get to see Robert De Niro play a young Corleone, right? And that was quite interesting to me, that part of it. So no problem with this one. Being at number 19, number 18 is Persona. It's an Ingmar Bergman film. Liv Ullmann. As revered as he is, Ingmar Bergman also gets something of a bad rap as a dour intellectual. So it's a Bergman film. I've not seen it, but um, I've seen The Seventh Seal, and I thought it was good, but I thought it was a bit too intellectual. But number 17 is Nashville. Nashville from 1975. I haven't seen this film. It's a Robert Altman film, right? I do collect Robert Altman. I have so many of his films that I haven't seen though. All right, number 16 is Casablanca. Can't go wrong with Casablanca. One of the great film noirs. So many of the dialogue in it is even repeated now. So uh, I actually watched this recently again for the I don't know the 12th, 13th time in my life. Extremely good film. All right. Next up is number 15, which is Sunrise, A Song for Two Humans from 1927. Uh, F.W. Murnau. He's one of the big names in early cinema. I don't know. I haven't seen this film, so I'm not sure. There it is. Okay, so they do have a Spike Lee film that's higher than Malcolm X, and that is Do the Right Thing. So they did what I thought they would do. So number 14 is Do the Right Thing from 1989. This is Spike Lee's greatest film. It's an extremely good film. It's basically about a pizza place owned by Italians in the middle of black neighborhood in Harlem, and the stuff that happens with it. There was a bit of controversy with Rosie Perez in this film, if I remember correctly, with that scene where she shows her boobs. She kind of felt coerced into doing that, and I think she spoke up about that later on in her career about that, and with all the Weinstein things and Bill Cosby and all that. The culture is there for women to air grievances that they had to go through in order to make it in cinema, right? So I think there was something about that, if I remember correctly. But anyways, this is his best film. If you want to see Spike Lee's best film, Do the Right Thing is it. I'm not sure if I put it that high at number 14, but anyways. Number 13 is The Rules of the Game, Le Règle des Jeux from 1939. This is an extremely good film. I've watched this film, um, and I have no issue with it being at 13. Number 12 is Goodfellas, arguably the greatest gangster film of all time. Um, if you don't think The Godfather is right. Ray Liotta in this film. I don't think he's had a better film than this film. I don't think he's had a great film in his acting career other than this film. And this film he's extremely good in. I have no problem with it being number 12. Number 11, Singing in the Rain, one of the greatest musicals of all time. So Gene Kelly is extremely good in this film. I watched it actually in the last couple of weeks, and I wouldn't put it in the 11. It'd probably be in like the 60s or 70s in the numbering for me, but I have no problem it being in the top 100. Number 10 is Saving Private Ryan, and there's that Spielberg, E.T., and Saving Private Ryan. The thing that made this film was the opening, like 30 minutes of it, 15 to 30 minutes of it, where they stormed the beaches of Normandy. That section of the film is some of the greatest filmmaking of all time. And, it blew me away when I saw it in the theaters when I watched this film back in the 90s. When it came out, we went and saw it in the theater. And that opening, what was it, like 30 minutes or whatever, where they stormed the beaches, that is one of the most impressive pieces of filmmaking that I've ever seen. And I have no problem with people thinking Saving Private Ryan is Spielberg's greatest film. So um, there was Storming the Beaches of Normandy, right? D-Day, Storming the Beaches of Normandy. Man, I'm getting old. All right, number 9 is All About Eve. This I wanted to say Bette Midler. Why? I'm getting tired. This Betty Davis film, extremely good. If you have not seen this film, very, very good film. I have no problem with it being in the top 10. Number 8 is It's a Wonderful Life. Another great film. I wouldn't put it that high. But, it's basically the story about what could have been, uh, and then realizing what actually happened is what you really wanted, right? So, very good film. I have no problem with it being in the top 10. Number 7 is 2001: A Space Odyssey. So this is another Kubrick film, but Kubrick's greatest films are, in my opinion, anyways, Full Metal Jacket and A Clockwork Orange. All right, Full Metal Jacket, and A Clockwork Orange are his two best films, and neither one of them are here. There's A Space Odyssey, so I guess whatever. But number six, maybe Kubrick will be higher. Should I sneak upwards? No. Well, anyways, we'll see. But if they chose 2001: A Space Odyssey over, Full Metal Jacket or um, Clockwork Orange, they picked the wrong. I mean, this is a good film, especially how he played the whole film without any music, and it was a lot of breathing. From the that breathing thing really creeped you out, and the voice of Hal in it really creeped you out. You know what I mean? So it was a suspenseful kind of film without having to have too much dialogue in it or whatever, right? So yeah, it's a really good film. I mean, but even 2000, even what the hell was the name of that film with Peter Sellers, what Kubrick did about the bomb, or How I Learned to Love the Bomb? Man, I'm getting tired. I thought that was a better film than this one. Anyways, all right. So number six is the Kurosawa film Seven Samurai. No problem with this being in the top 10. This is one of the greatest films of all time. Hollywood loved this film. They made like um, a few remakes of it, basically. Like The Magnificent Seven is basically a direct remake of this, um, and all that. So basically, it's about seven samurai who protect a village against a bunch of bandits and all die doing it, right? So, um, but Kurosawa has so many good films, like Jimbo and other ones, and Hollywood basically took his samurai films and turned them into westerns, basically, Hollywood westerns. All right, so number five is Pulp Fiction, which is Tarantino's greatest film. Tarantino has all of his films are good, but those great elite films of his, Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, um, Kill Bill 1 and 2, um, amazing films. So, but Pulp Fiction is his best film, and it's number five on this. I have no issue with that at all. Number four is Citizen Kane. A lot of people argue this is the greatest film of all time. I have watched this, and they talk about how Orson Welles, created so many camera angles, and they would put a camera. They would have a floor, and they would raise the floor up in order to put the camera low in order to get a shot of a scene where the camera is low, and these cameras weren't small as they are today. They're like bulky things, right? So he was like praised on his filmmaking because of uh, how his use of camera, right? So and that comes a lot in this film, right? But I think I was kind of bored with this film until the end when you saw that Rosebud was basically a sled from when he was a kid or whatever, right? Um, but that was touching. But most of the movie I found a bit dry. So, but a lot of people consider this film one of the greatest of all time. So, um, like if I was to make, I would put Citizen Kane. If it would be low in the hundred if I put it in, right? So, um, but I understand why it's so high. So number three is there's The Godfather. All right. So they have The Godfather Part One and Part Two. Um, many consider this the greatest film of all time. Uh, the IMDb, this has been what, number two behind The Shawshank Redemption. And it's funny. I wonder if they'll have The Shawshank Redemption and it's at number one, because we haven't seen The Shawshank Redemption yet, and everybody praises that film, and it's like number one on the IMDb for decades, right? So, anyway, so The Godfather, no problem with that being number three. Number two is The Wizard of Oz, very good, one of the great musicals of all time. I have no problem with this being in the top 10 from 1939. It is an extremely good film. All right, and what is that, number two? Yeah, that's number two. So what is number one? What is number one? Oh, really? Psycho? Okay. I'm surprised it wasn't Shawshank Redemption. Psycho. So they think that Hitchcock's greatest film is Psycho, not Rear Window. Yeah, Psycho was defining. Basically, um, the slasher film became popular in the late 70s, early 80s. So you had what? You had Halloween in 1978, which started it off basically. But then once, Freddy came along and Jason came along and all those slasher films became popular in the 80s, they started looking back. They had asked the question, what was the first slasher film, right? And they would go back, well, was Halloween was kind of like the start of the bigness of it, right? Um, then they went back and they said, oh, but you have Black Christmas from 1974, and that's a slasher film basically, and that was a creepy film because a lot of the camera work was done through the eyes of the killer, right? So when you watch the film, you were like a voyeur in the killer's eyes, and but it's a slasher film, I guess you could say. And there's other ones, but then they would go back all the way to 1960 to Psycho and say, well, Anthony Perkins dressed up as his mother and used the knife to kill that girl in the shower. So it's kind of like a slasher film. So maybe that was the start of the slasher film. So technically, I guess you could say that, but I think Black Christmas would be probably the start, and Halloween just made it blow up, right? So anyway, so Psycho is number one. A horror film as number one. When do you ever see a horror film be number one in a film? So interesting. But um, Blade Runner wasn't there, so they had Alien from Ridley Scott, but they didn't have Blade Runner, which is his greatest film. So that's kind of interesting. They didn't have that film, and they didn't have Shawshank Redemption. Okay, people consider that one of the great films of all time. So they did not have Akira, which is the greatest anime film of all time, but they put a Studio Ghibli film in there. So they had Toy Story and they had My Neighbor Totoro as and Bambi. So three animated films, one from Disney, one from Pixar, one from Studio Ghibli, the big three, right? So trying to think of, so they didn't have Die Hard in it, which is probably the greatest action film of all time. All right, that would that would make my top 100. Trying to think of other films. Um, Life is Beautiful, the Benigni film. That was an extremely good film. That's not there. There was not one like Brazil. Brazil wasn't there. Um, Terry Gilliam. There was no Terry Gilliam films in there. There was a lot of European films in it, so that's probably why. You have Europe, like mainland Europe, then you have England, English films, then you have mainland Europe, which are basically like foreign language films. They had a good representation of those, so that's good. They didn't have those Kubrick films I was talking about. They did have like Kubrick in it, right? And the Coen Brothers, which is good. No Big Lebowski though, which is the Coen Brothers' greatest film, is the Big Lebowski. A whole bunch will pop into my head, but whenever you put somebody on the spot, things go away. Rocky, no First Blood, right? So if you don't put First Blood, that's fine, but you got to put Rocky in there, right? Great Escape. Yeah, I think um, you could double the amount of movies in this top and intermix them. The IMDb has a top 250 because there's so many good movies, right? So if you break it down to 100, I'm going to do a list of 100 of my favorite films. I don't know if they're the greatest films of all time, but my top 100 favorite films. But overall, it's not a bad list, right? A lot of great films. You got a representation of early cinema, mid cinema, later cinema. You got um, some from Asia, some from Europe, right? So overall, not too bad. I mean, they did forget like Blade Runner not being there is like, I don't, and Titanic there instead of the Terminator or Aliens 2 or Terminator 2. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that one either. But anyways, overall, it's a good list, I think. All right, um, so that's it. Those are the top 100. Psycho is number one. I'm not sure Psycho should be that high. I think I enjoyed Rear Window better than Psycho, and I enjoyed Vertigo better than that. And there is no birds there, which is probably one of the scariest films I have ever seen in my life. Right. So anyway, so all right. So that's it. I hope. Thank you for following me in this video, and if you thought it was interesting, leave a thumbs up. Think about subscribing if you so desire, and I would appreciate that. And you have a great day, and I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye for now.